The cemetery was silent, but not still. The trees rustled as if they too whispered prayers. A single bench sat under the old sycamore tree, worn smooth by time and ritual. On it, every day for 7 years, sat a man who said nothing, did nothing, except arrive at sunrise and leave just before sunset. His name was Samuel Hart. No one knew much else about him, not anymore. Once, maybe, he'd been something. Someone, but whatever that was, it had ended on the day she died. And now, every day without fail, he sat beside her grave, rain or shine, like a soldier on eternal guard duty. He never brought flowers, he never wept, but there was a letter, a folded, yellowing envelope, always left beneath the headstone, always sealed, no name on the front. People noticed, the groundskeeper, a few regular mourners, even a couple of neighborhood kids who thought the place was haunted. But no one dared touch the letter. It was as if the sadness around it formed a shield, until someone did. But that's not today's story, not yet. Today we go back to when it all began. 7 years earlier, the world had ended quietly. No explosions, no sirens, just the long final exhale of a woman in a hospital bed and the sound of a man's soul folding in on itself. "Sam," she whispered, barely audible. "Promise me." He leaned closer, tears forming but not falling. He wanted to be strong for her. That had always been his job. He was the oak, she was the light. "Promise me you won't disappear." He nodded, but she saw through it. "No." Her fingers gripped his wrist, faint but urgent. "Don't hide. Don't build a tomb inside yourself. Let someone find you." Her hand fell away before he could answer. The machines didn't scream. They simply stilled. Samuel stood there, long after the nurse came in, after the doctor gently patted his shoulder, after the world continued without her. He didn't scream, didn't speak. He just walked. And the next day he sat at her grave. They'd been married 31 years. No kids, not by choice. Life had other plans. Miscarriages, surgeries, heartbreaks. But they had each other, and that had always been enough, until it wasn't. After her death, Samuel retired early, sold their house, moved into a small one-bedroom apartment 3 blocks from the cemetery. He lived off pensions and silence. He refused visitors, canceled every social obligation. The only thing he didn't cancel was the letter. It started on the 3rd day. He sat there, stone still, and then, without a word, he pulled a small notebook from his coat, wrote a single sentence, tore the page out, folded it, left it under the headstone. No one saw what it said. He would do the same thing the next day, and the next, and every day after, always 1 page. Always the same ritual. The folded note left beneath the marker. Some guessed it was a prayer. Others thought it was guilt, a confession, a goodbye too hard to say out loud. But no one dared ask him. He didn't speak, not once. By the 2nd year, he was known simply as the grave man. Local joggers would whisper about him as they passed. Children dared each other to touch the bench when he wasn't there. Teenagers filmed short TikToks in the distance, always, with the same eerie caption, "He's still there." Only one person ever tried to talk to him. Her name was Jenny. She worked part-time for the cemetery during college, kind-hearted, curious, brave in a way that only the young can be. She brought him coffee one morning, left it beside him without a word. He didn't look up. The next day she did the same. This time he took it, that was all. No thank you, no eye contact. But something shifted. She began to bring a second coffee every week. It became part of his ritual. Sunrise, the letter, the coffee, the silence. Then one morning, he left 2 letters. Jenny waited until he'd gone. She approached the grave slowly. Her hand trembled as she reached for the second envelope. But when she touched it, it wasn't sealed. Inside, a single line. "You remind me of her kindness." Tears welled up in her eyes. She didn't know him. Not really. But in that moment, she felt the weight of 1,000 quiet sorrows settle around her like fog. She wrote a letter back, left it the next day. Tell me about her. I want to know who she was. No reply. Not the next day. Not the one after. She stopped bringing coffee, stopped walking past his bench, stopped caring. Or so she thought. It was the 6th anniversary of her death when it happened. The cemetery was busier than usual, some sort of veterans service at the far end. Samuel sat in his usual spot. The wind tugged at his coat, but he didn't move. This time, though, he left no letter. Instead, he rose slowly and walked past the bench, past the trees, out the cemetery gates. He didn't return the next day, or the day after. The groundskeeper noticed first. Then the coffee girl, now a teacher, heard through a friend. 3 days passed. Then 4. On the 5th, someone else found a new envelope on the grave. It wasn't yellowed like the others. It was crisp, clean, and scrawled across the front in shaking black ink was a single word: read. That's when everything changed. That's when the story really began. But to understand what was in that letter, to truly feel its weight, we have to go back one more time, back to the beginning, to the man Samuel used to be, before the silence, before the sorrow, before the truth he buried deeper than the grave itself, because the letter didn't just hold words, it held a secret, one that would shake an entire town, one that would bring strangers to their knees, one that would make people question everything they thought they knew about love, regret, and redemption. But that's tomorrow's story. For now, all you need to remember is this. He sat alone at his wife's grave every day for 7 years. He never cried, he never spoke, and then he left a letter. That changed everything. It was Jenny who finally unfolded the letter. The envelope trembled slightly in her hand. Something about it felt heavier than it should have. Not physically, but in the way a sealed secret always feels like it's breathing. She looked around. The cemetery was nearly empty, just the distant clang of wind chimes someone had tied to a tree, and the low hum of bees passing through wildflowers. The air was still, and then she opened it. Inside, the paper was thick, cream-colored. It looked like it had been written with a fountain pen, black ink, sharp and careful. Samuel's handwriting was steady, but old-fashioned. You could tell he wrote like someone who learned in a different era. Each stroke felt deliberate. At the top, one word, to whom it may concern. Jenny frowned. She had expected something personal, maybe even a goodbye. But the letter read more like a story, a confession. She sat down on the bench where he had sat all those years, and began to read aloud, softly, like she was afraid the wind might carry the words away too soon. My name is Samuel Hart, and I'm writing this, not as a farewell, but as an explanation. You've seen me here. Maybe you've wondered. Maybe you haven't. But if you're holding this, I can no longer remain a ghost among the living. It's time the truth found daylight. My wife, Eleanor, was the finest human being I have ever known. But what you don't know, what no one knows, is that she died protecting a secret I gave her. You see, I was not always the quiet man on the bench. Once, I was something else, entirely. I was a man with a second life. Jenny's eyes lifted. The words didn't register at first. She looked at Eleanor's grave, then back at the page. What did that mean? A secret? A second life? She kept reading. I was a corporate investigator. Before you assume the glamorous, know this. I wasn't a spy. I didn't wear a wire. I didn't chase anyone across rooftops. I followed money. Hidden money. Money that wasn't supposed to exist. The kind of money that destroys families. That disappears from public schools and reappears in foreign accounts. The kind of money that kills. I was good at it. Too good. I uncovered something I wasn't supposed to. And I did what they always tell you not to do. I brought it home. I told my wife." Jenny stopped breathing for a moment. The next lines shifted. Suddenly the handwriting was more erratic. Like he had written this part in a single breath. "I thought I could protect her. I thought telling her would make the burden lighter, but all I did was mark her. They came to our house. Once. A warning. A flat tire that wasn't flat. A dog barking at shadows. I didn't listen. I kept digging. And then Eleanor got sick. Fast. Too fast. The doctors said cancer. A rare one. Aggressive. But the timing, it felt like punishment. I'll never prove it. But I know in my bones that she didn't die of illness. She died because I couldn't let go. She died because of me." Jenny's fingers tightened around the paper. The words were starting to blur. She wiped her eyes. Eleanor's grave seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. The wind blew again, carrying with it something between a sigh and a whisper. Jenny kept reading. "After she passed, I made a vow. I would never chase shadows again. I would bury the truth as deep as her casket. But every day I sat here I wondered, was I right to stay silent? Or was silence the final act of cowardice?" The letter ended abruptly after that line. No signature, no closing, just silence. Jenny folded the letter back into the envelope, her mind reeling. Had this man truly believed his wife had been murdered? And if so, why hadn't he said anything? Done anything? Or had he? She looked back at the grave. Her thoughts raced. Maybe those notes he left each day weren't love letters. Maybe they were breadcrumbs. That night, Jenny couldn't sleep. She searched Samuel Hart online. There wasn't much. An old retirement article from the finance sector. A LinkedIn page long deactivated. One blurry photo of him and Eleanor at a fundraising gala in 1992. No mention of any scandal, no whispers of corruption, no indication he had ever done the things he claimed. But the letter, it felt true, and that was what haunted her. Because if it was true, then someone had gotten away with murder. The next morning, Jenny returned to the cemetery. Samuel wasn't there. She walked to the grave. No letter. No sign of him. But as she turned to leave, something caught her eye. A small piece of paper wedged beneath the bench leg. She bent down and pulled it free. It was folded tightly, with faint dirt along the edges. As if someone had dropped it by mistake. She unfolded it. This one wasn't poetic. It wasn't a story. It was a list. 10 names. 1 city. A date circled in red. August 19th, 1997. Jenny didn't recognize the names. But the date, it felt important. A gut feeling. Like a door barely cracked open. She took a picture and stuffed the note into her bag. Back home, she opened her laptop. She Googled the date and the city. She filtered the results, skimmed past birthdays, weather reports, sports scores, and then she found it. Charity building collapse kills 4, injures 23, gas leak suspected. A local news article from 1997. Nothing flashy, just another forgotten tragedy in a world full of them. But the names in the article match the names on Samuel's list. All 4 people who died on that paper. Jenny leaned back in her chair, her heart pounding. What if it hadn't been a gas leak? What if it had been a message? Over the next week, Jenny became obsessed. She read every article about the building collapse, dug through public records, called old reporters. No foul play had ever been proven. The investigation had quietly ended. The building's owner settled lawsuits out of court. No one ever connected it to corporate malfeasance, but someone had. Samuel had. She began to see a pattern. The building had been owned by a shell company, registered offshore, dissolved 3 months after the incident. One of the victims was a whistleblower. Another had worked in finance. Another in city inspection. And one name stood out, a man named Charles Holloway. Jenny recognized it. He was on Samuel's list. But here's the thing. Charles hadn't died. He'd been injured, transferred hospitals. Went off the radar. She found one article about him surviving. No follow-up, no obituary, no interview, just gone. Jenny did something she never thought she'd do. She printed the list and mailed it, with a copy of the letter, to a local journalist she trusted, one who covered corruption. She sent it anonymously, unsigned. Then she returned to the cemetery. This time, Samuel was there. She didn't speak at first, just sat beside him on the bench, the same way she used to leave coffee. He didn't look at her, but then he said something. Quiet. Barely a whisper. They'll come for you if you follow it too far. She turned. His eyes were distant, hollow, but aware. You believe someone killed her? She asked. He nodded. Why didn't you say something? Go to the police? He turned to her then, really looked at her for the first time in years. Because when I did, they said I was grieving, said I was unstable, said I needed rest. A pause. And because the men who came to my door didn't need to say anything. I saw it in their eyes. Jenny swallowed hard. So why now? Why leave the letter? His voice broke then. Just once. Because someone should know. That was the last time she saw him. The next day, the bench was empty. A nurse at the nearby care home said he'd checked himself in, quietly. No drama, just left his keys on the counter. Took nothing with him. He didn't even bring a coat. It wasn't cold that day, but somehow it felt like winter had begun. The article dropped 3 days later. Buried beneath the ledger, how a 1997 gas leak may have hidden a corporate cover-up. It was front page on a regional site within hours. By noon, it had trended on local Twitter. By evening, the national. Outlets were calling it the letter that started everything. They didn't know who wrote it. They didn't know Jenny had sent it. And they didn't know Samuel Hart's name. But the journalist, Dana Reyes, had done her job. She'd traced the building's ownership to a now-defunct finance group tied to several scandals. She'd verified the names. She even managed to interview the family of one victim, who recalled their father worrying about something right before the explosion. That detail? It cracked the case open. Suddenly, the 1997 tragedy wasn't forgotten. It was suspicious, and Jenny's anonymous tip became the matchstick that lit the flame. Jenny stood in front of Eleanor Hart's grave again, a printed copy of the article, folded neatly in her hands. She didn't know if Samuel had seen it, she didn't know if he was still lucid enough to care, but she needed him to know. I sent it, she said aloud. Her voice trembled, but she didn't back down. I read the letter, I followed the names, I found a journalist who listened. Silence. I don't know if this helps you or hurts you, but you were right, Sam. You weren't crazy. They just didn't want you to be heard. The wind shifted. A leaf landed near her shoe, and for a second, she thought she heard someone breathing behind her. She turned. No one. That night, she called the care home. Samuel had checked out 2 days prior. No forwarding contact, no explanation. He just walked out, the nurse said. Didn't even take the cane we gave him. Jenny's stomach tightened. He was out there. Somewhere. And now people were starting to pay attention. She went back to her research. This time, she didn't just look for the past, she looked for Charles Holloway. The man who didn't die. The man who vanished. She started with business records. Dead end. Moved on to health files, court records, land deeds, anything. One hit. A property purchase. In Oregon, 4 years after the explosion. Under a different name, but with a matching Social Security number. The house had since been sold again, but that was something. Jenny sent the information to Dana Reyes, the journalist. Let me handle it, Dana texted back. This could get dangerous. Jenny believed her, but she also didn't stop. Meanwhile, something else began to unravel. A new witness came forward, an old janitor who'd worked in the charity building before it collapsed. He'd always suspected the leak wasn't natural. He remembered being told to ignore the smell by a foreman connected to the city's inspection department. That foreman? one of the names on Samuel's list. Within a week, 3 former employees agreed to talk. Dana Reyes published a follow-up piece, How a Whistleblower's Wife May Have Been Silenced to Keep a Fortune Hidden. This time, Samuel Hart's name was used. He was no longer a mystery, he was a man with grief, and now with credibility. The internet did what the internet does, it made him viral. Jenny wasn't ready for what came next. She got an email, subject line, "Thank you for seeing him." The message was brief, untraceable, no name, no signature. You gave him peace. That's all I ever wanted. Jenny stared at the screen. Her blood ran cold. Was this someone pretending to be Eleanor? Was it a cruel prank? Or was it a code? She reread the note. You gave him peace. She remembered his voice. Because someone should know. What if Samuel had told someone? Before? What if there was more? What if the letter she found wasn't the only one? She went to his apartment. The door was locked, but a neighbor was outside. The old guy, he said, moved out, left the keys under the mat. Place is empty. Jenny hesitated, then picked up the keys. Inside, the apartment was eerily clean. Not the neatness of order, but of vacancy. No photos, no keepsakes, just an old wooden desk, a single bed, and a bookshelf filled with classic literature. Dickens, Tolstoy, Austen. She opened the desk drawer. Inside, envelopes, dozens, each one labeled, each one addressed to someone different. To Jenny, to the journalist, to the city inspector's widow, to the son of the janitor. Jenny's hand shook as she reached for hers. She opened it. You kept your promise, even though I never made you one. I've watched people pass me by for years pretending I was a statue. You didn't. You sat beside me, you brought me coffee, you reminded me that Eleanor's kindness wasn't a fluke. It lives on. The truth is, I never wanted revenge. I wanted acknowledgement. Someone to say, we see it now. You saw it. I can go now. It wasn't long. But it was enough. Jenny cried. She cried not for the story or the scandal or the secrets, but for the man who had carried his grief like armor, and finally set it down. She stayed there a long time. Then, she packed up the letters and mailed them, each one, to its intended recipient. She mailed her own copy of the letter to Dana Reyes, and then she did one last thing. She went back to the grave. She sat on the bench. The place felt different now, lighter somehow, as if the weight of 7 years of silence had finally lifted. She left a coffee at the foot of the headstone, and a note. I think I get it now. You weren't waiting for her. You were waiting for someone. You found them. I hope you're together again. 2 weeks later, the city opened a formal investigation into the 1997 explosion. The story hit national news. 3 executives were arrested for financial fraud unrelated to the collapse. But the press latched on to the thread. Samuel Hart was mentioned in every article. His photo, the one from 1992 at the fundraiser, was splashed across headlines. Widower's letter uncovers decades-old secret. The man who mourned in silence and brought the truth to light. He sat at her grave for 7 years. Now we know why. No one saw him again. Not in Oregon, not in the city, not in the care home. Some say he passed away quietly in a hospice no one knew about. Some say he left the country. One rumor even claims he bought a boat and lives on the water now, drifting, watching sunrises, still writing letters he'll never send. But Jenny knows better. She believes he's gone, but not lost. Because some legacies aren't built from fame or vengeance. They're built from endurance, from silence, from a love so deep it carries the truth across decades until someone's brave enough to listen. The story didn't end with Samuel's disappearance. In many ways, it only deepened, because a week after the national coverage peaked, after the city declared it would reopen files long considered buried, a second journalist came forward. This one from Philadelphia. She claimed to have received a letter 5 years ago, no return address. Inside, a list of financial transfers, offshore bank records, and a brief message. You'll know what to do when the time is right. S.H. She hadn't acted on it. Not then. It had seemed like a prank, a riddle. But when the name Samuel Hart resurfaced in connection with the charity building explosion, she recognized the initials. The documents, long filed away, were suddenly radioactive. They pointed to a financial laundering scheme, stretching from small charities in the Midwest to political donations in New England. The same shell companies linked to the 1997 explosion were named again, but there was more. They linked to current entities, active ones. That's when the stakes changed. Jenny was at home when she got the call from Dana Reyes. "This is bigger than we thought," Dana said. "The collapse? It was just the start." Jenny barely blinked. "Bigger how?" "Someone's still moving money. Same patterns. New names." And Sam knew? He didn't just know. He mapped it. Jenny swallowed. Then, "We need to finish what he started." The problem was, no one knew where Samuel had kept the rest. The apartment had been cleared. The care home had nothing. No notebooks, no electronics, not even a phone. That's when Jenny remembered the bench. The one in the cemetery. The one where he had sat, day after day, as the world passed by. She returned just before dusk. The place was quiet, overgrown. Still, she sat on the bench, closed her eyes. If she were Samuel, where would she hide something meant to be found later? She ran her fingers under the bench. Smooth wood, bolts rusted in place. Then she noticed something. One of the bolts was newer. She took out her keys, wedged one beneath the head of the bolt and twisted. It came loose, revealing a hollow cylinder inside the leg of the bench. Inside it, a flash drive, dusty, sealed in plastic. But intact? She held it in her palm like it was a bomb. At home, she plugged it into her old laptop. No internet, just in case. The drive contained one folder. To be opened after the letter. Inside, documents, spreadsheets, PDFs, photographs. A full-blown investigation. Samuel hadn't just theorized a conspiracy. He'd documented every step. Connections, transfers, board members, conflicts of interest, building permits, offshore LLCs, and handwritten annotations on every page in a scrawled but steady hand. They moved the funds here. She warned me about this donor. This wasn't an accident. It was leverage. It was a roadmap, decades long, and at the very bottom, a video. Fill name, Eleanor, final day. Jenny's heart dropped. She clicked it. The video opened. In what looked like a hospital room. Eleanor Hart lay in bed, pale but alert. Samuel sat beside her, holding her hand. The timestamp read, March 12, 2016, 8:02 a.m. Eleanor looked into the camera. "If you're watching this, it means Sam finally shared the truth. I need you to believe him, even if it sounds paranoid, even if it sounds impossible. Believe him. He's not a conspiracy theorist. He's a man who tried to do the right thing and lost everything for it. They warned him. They warned us. But he wouldn't back down. I told him I supported him, and I do. I always did. But if I die and he thinks it's his fault, tell him it wasn't. Tell him I chose this. I chose truth over comfort. And I love him, even if he never forgives himself." She turned to Samuel. "Promise me, when it's time you'll share it." He nodded, lips pressed together so tightly they were white. The screen faded to black. Jenny sat there in silence, tears spilled before she even realized she was crying. The next day, she met Dana Reyes in person. They spread the files. Across a rented conference room table, maps, accounts, timelines, like two detectives in a forgotten cold case. "There's enough here to open a federal probe," Dana said. "And danger?" Jenny asked. "Plenty. They filed under aliases, used burner phones. The story was too valuable and too radioactive to risk exposure. But the truth had inertia now. And momentum. and names. Among the files, one name stood out: Vincent Rourke, CEO of a philanthropic trust, public darling, donor to children's hospitals, smiling, gray-haired, always with his arm around some child in a newspaper photo. Also, former board member of the finance group that owned the collapsed building in 1997. Also, signer on the account that paid off the city inspector's retirement in a single wire transfer the month after the explosion. Rourke had survived a dozen scandals without a scratch, but Samuel had cornered him on paper, and he had one weakness: a son. Buried in the files was a second video, this one from a hidden camera in what looked like a private club bar. Rourke's son, Matthew, drunk, laughing, bragging. Dad says if anyone ever finds out about the building thing, it's the end of the family name. He made sure all the files were gone, burned, except for that one dude's copy, the accountant. But he's dead, right? Ha 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 ha. Boom. Another man on camera muttered, "Don't talk about that Rourke's son raised his glass. "Dead men tell no tales." Jenny felt her stomach churn. Samuel hadn't just built a case, he had built a trap, one only triggered by exposure, and now it was clicking shut. The next day, Dana's article hit: "The Collapse of a Lie, How One Man's Grief Exposed a $1 billion Conspiracy." This time, the evidence was too strong. The FBI opened a preliminary inquiry. Subpoenas were issued. Vincent Rourke held a press conference, denying all allegations, blaming a culture of conspiracy and digital manipulation. But the video of his son went viral. And then the court of public opinion turned. Jenny walked back to the cemetery one last time. She sat on the bench. Same spot. Eleanor's grave stood in front of her, peaceful, familiar. She spoke quietly. "Your story's out now." She laid a hand on the headstone. "I hope you're watching. I hope you're proud." A soft breeze passed over her shoulder, and she smiled. She never saw Samuel again, but she got one last letter. It arrived weeks later, forwarded from an old P.O. box. No return address. Just her name. "I never expected the end to come this way. I thought I'd disappear into silence, but you dragged me back into light. They say love is immortal, that grief is proof of it. I believe that now. I couldn't save her, but you helped me honor her. And in doing so, you gave me peace." There was a small Polaroid tucked inside. A photo of the bench empty, just the sun breaking through the trees, and a shadow, tall, broad, walking away. The letter sat on Jenny's desk for days. Unread? No, she had read it. Once. But then folded it shut like something holy, as if the paper could collapse under the weight of what it meant. Samuel was gone, but his legacy was now living on every screen in the country, and with each new headline, each indictment, each journalist breathlessly tracking shell companies and missing funds, Jenny realized something no one else had said aloud. The most dangerous man in the country had been an old man on a bench. She didn't seek out the spotlight, but the story dragged her in. Reporters came to her door. Dana tried to run interference. "She's not the story," Dana would say. "She just carried the message." But they insisted. Who was the girl who found the letter? Why did she read it? And what made her believe it? Jenny answered none of them. Not really. She gave one interview to a quiet podcast that focused on anonymous heroes. She sat in a small studio, the microphone, crackling, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "He didn't want revenge," she said. "He wanted to be heard." Pause. He waited 7 years to speak. "And what made you read the letter?" the host asked. Jenny smiled faintly. "Because no one else did." But behind the headlines, something else was happening. The case had caught the attention of a retired investigator named Curtis Bledsoe. He was an old warhorse, half-deaf, chain-smoking, and foul-mouthed, but brilliant. He reached out to Dana Reyes. "I knew Vincent Rourke," he said. 30 years ago, back when he was still buying judges and selling off the soul of the city, one playground at a time. Bledsoe hadn't worked a case in years, but Samuel Hart's file fascinated him. Who the hell builds a case this airtight, then waits for a stranger to read it? He muttered. Dana shrugged. Someone who lost too much to risk losing more. Bledsoe tapped the flash drive with a fingernail. This guy didn't just investigate. He mapped people, motives, regrets. He found patterns no one else saw. He leaned in. "I want to find him." Jenny was against it at first. "Let him be," she said. "He's done enough." But Bledsoe shook his head. No one does this much work just to vanish. They started with a hypothesis. If Samuel hadn't died, he would have gone somewhere quiet, but not unknown. Somewhere his wife had loved. Somewhere safe, with meaning. Jenny remembered something from one of his letters, a phrase. She always wanted to retire near water. That was their clue. Bledsoe combed through property records along the coast. Oregon, California, Washington. Then one morning he found it, a sailboat purchased in cash, registered under the name Eleanor's Grace. No last name, no slip fees paid since the day it docked, but still, active registration, and docked in a tiny inlet marina off the coast of Port Townsend. They drove there. Bledsoe's car wheezed the whole way. Jenny sat in the passenger seat, palms sweating. What would she say? What if he didn't want to be found? What if he wasn't alive? The marina was quiet. Sunlight bounced off the water like shattered glass. Slip, Crow 42, a white boat. Small, modest, the name painted in blue script, Eleanor's Grace. They stepped onto the dock. No one. Jenny knocked. No answer. Then, movement. A figure stepped into view. It was him, thinner, beard longer, but unmistakably Samuel Hart. He looked at her. Not with surprise, but with recognition. "I thought it'd be you," he said. Jenny exhaled. "Why here?" she asked. Samuel sat on the edge of the boat. She always loved this bay. And the boat? He looked at it as if seeing it for the first time. "She used to say we'd sail away someday, just disappear." "Is that what you're doing?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat and handed her a small notebook. It was leather-bound, soft, worn. "Final piece," he said. "You earned it." Inside the notebook, coordinates, names, bank account, trails, dates, and at the very back one sentence. "If you're reading this, then the fight is still going, and so am I." Jenny closed it slowly. "I thought this was about her." "It was," Samuel said, "but it became about everyone like her, everyone who trusted the wrong people." He looked at her, eyes suddenly sharp. "You can burn the rest, or you can finish it." She didn't hesitate. "I'll finish it." Back in the car, Bledsoe was quiet. "You good with this?" he asked. Jenny nodded. He doesn't need the world to know he's alive. He just needed to know the world was finally listening. Bledsoe lit a cigarette. "You're a better woman than me." Jenny smiled. "That's a low bar." They both laughed. But behind the laughter, something deeper sat. An understanding. This wasn't a story anymore. It was a cause. Over the next few months, Dana's stories exploded into a serialized investigation. The Hart Files, weekly releases, each episode featuring a new piece of evidence from the notebook, each one exposing deeper corruption, funds misallocated from disaster relief, construction contracts given to phantom companies, laws passed because of donations traced back to bribes. Every time a new article dropped, protests sparked. By summer's end, 4 city councils had resigned, 2 governors were under federal audit, and the president was forced to respond during a press conference. "We take these allegations seriously. If even half of what's in these reports is true, there will be consequences." Jenny never stepped back into the spotlight. She let the story grow without her. She wrote Samuel letters, though, real letters, folded in envelopes and mailed to a mailbox in Port Townsend. Sometimes she wrote updates. Sometimes she just said thank you. She never got a reply. But one day, a package arrived. No note, no return address. Inside, a photo of Eleanor Hart, laughing beside the ocean, holding a seashell to her ear. And a second photo of Jenny, taken at the grave, months ago. She was sitting on the bench holding coffee in one hand and a folded letter in the other, in the corner, scrawled handwriting. Because you listened. The world kept turning. Trials began. Apologies were made on courtroom steps. Laws changed. And somewhere on the sea, a man wrote letters no one would read. Just in case. The world ever stopped listening again. Jenny hadn't expected the world to move on so quickly. 2 months after the final Hart Files installment aired, public attention shifted. The media cycle turned to a celebrity scandal, then an election, then a war. But the changes Samuel had set in motion didn't fade. They rooted. A foundation was launched in Eleanor's name, the Grace Project, committed to funding grassroots watchdog journalism and civic transparency. It started small, seeded by anonymous donations, but then came an influx. People gave, some because they believed in truth, some because they'd read the letter, and some because they'd once walked past a man on a bench and wondered why he never looked up. Jenny became its quiet director. She didn't take interviews, didn't want credit. She hired young investigators, trained them herself, and kept the old flash drive locked in a fireproof box. Each year, on the anniversary of Eleanor's death, she returned to the cemetery. She never brought flowers, only coffee and a folded letter of her own. She always placed it under the headstone, sealed. It was her way of telling Samuel what had changed, what had healed, what still needed fixing. One morning, 2 years after the story broke, a new name surfaced: Edwin Vale, a financial broker in his early 60s. Low profile, no scandal. But then someone noticed one of his accounts, long thought dormant, had received multiple large transfers from an organization tied to Rourke's holdings. At first it was passed off as pension reshuffling, but then someone leaked a recording. Vale, drunk in a bar. They think just because Rourke fell, the rest of us are ghosts. They don't realize Hart left a trail big enough for all of us to hang from. You think he's dead? Nah. Guys like that, they don't die. They wait. You ever seen someone ruin your life without saying a word? That's Hart. The story exploded again. The Grace Project filed a FOIA request. Dana Reyes returned. From a 2-year sabbatical with a full-length documentary. Title: The Man Who Waited. It premiered at Sundance. Won awards. And in the final 5 minutes, Dana read aloud from the original letter Jenny had found. Over scenes of empty cemeteries, crashing waves, and shots of the bench now sealed in a glass memorial case, she spoke. You remind me of her kindness. I couldn't save her, but maybe I can save someone else. Someone should know. The final image. A shadowed man walking along a dock. No face. Only the name of the boat behind him. Eleanor's Grace. After the documentary aired, a rumor started that somewhere in Seattle, a man had visited a bookstore and left a note inside a copy of Anna Karenina. The note read, "She loved this one best," page 234. The clerk kept it, posted it online. The page, a line underlined in pencil. There are as many kinds of love as there are hearts. The internet went wild. Some thought it was fake, others called it a hoax. But Jenny knew better. She flew to Seattle a week later, not to find him, just to sit in the bookstore, to touch the page, to feel the way a ripple keeps moving long after the stone is gone. She left a book of her own behind. The Old Man in the Sea. Inside, a note. Thank you for not drowning. The Grace Project reached new heights. It won a Peabody, then a Pulitzer. Then something more important, trust. When disasters struck, they showed up first. When corruption flared, they were already watching. And every file, every report, was archived under a codename, Heartline. 5 years to the day after Jenny first found the letter, the city unveiled a sculpture in the cemetery. It wasn't grand, just a bench, exact replica, bronze plaque inlaid along the edge. In memory of Eleanor Hart, and to the man who waited beside her, some truths whisper, thank you for listening. No names, no headlines, just silence and the hum of wind in the trees. Jenny sat there on opening day. The crowd had gone. The ribbon had been cut. Alone again, she placed one final letter under the bench leg. Inside, it worked. They listened. She's remembered. You are too. She stood, smiled, and walked away without turning back. Far off, on a quiet deck somewhere by the water, an old man sipped coffee from a thermos worn thin at the handle. He didn't need to read the news. He didn't need to hear the applause. He just needed to know. She had been seen. The past had stopped chasing him, but it hadn't stopped watching. Samuel Hart lived now in the kind of quiet he used to fear, anonymity without loneliness. There were no more letters to leave behind, no more facts to organize, just sunrises, coffee, and waves. But still, he wrote. Not for the world, not for justice, for her. Every morning, before the sea breeze picked up, he sat at the tiny wooden desk inside Eleanor's Grace and filled a page in the same brown leather notebook. Today the tide came in high. You would have laughed at how the gulls scolded the fishermen. I swear one of them stared me down like it knew something. Each entry was a memory, a whisper to the woman who taught him how to hold grief without letting it drown him. He never reread them. He didn't need to. The writing was the remembrance. But peace, as it turns out, is a fragile thing. And one letter, one that was never supposed to be found, surfaced in a second-hand bookstore in Spokane. It was tucked inside a hollowed-out book titled The Ethics of Silence. The customer who found it was a college student, writing a thesis on whistleblower morality. He opened the book and the envelope fell out. No name, no date. Inside, a single page. If I vanish, follow the coordinates in the ledger. The final file is not digital. It's safer that way. What's buried is real, and it's enough to finish everything. There was a scribbled line beneath. To the one who listened, finish what I started. Not what I believed, but what I proved. The student posted a photo on Reddit. Within 6 hours, it had 30,000 upvotes. The Grace Project was tagged over 100 times. Jenny saw it the next morning and froze. Because she recognized the handwriting, she called Bledsoe. He left another trail, she said. I thought the files were complete, he replied, groggy. So did I. They followed the lead. The ledger mentioned in the note was part of the original flash drive, but it had coordinates that were blurred out. File corruption, they'd assumed. Now they knew better. Samuel had intentionally obscured the final set of numbers, and now he was pointing someone toward them. The coordinates led to the Olympic Peninsula, dense forests, sharp coastline, and a scattering of abandoned ranger stations from the early 1900s. They narrowed it down to one that hadn't been used since 1983. Jenny and Bledsoe hiked for 4 hours, no paths, no signals. But at the base of a ravine, half swallowed by moss and time, they found it. The door had rusted shut. Bledsoe kicked it once and it gave way. Inside, a cot, a desk, a lantern, and, beneath a loose floorboard, a metal lockbox. They pried it open. Inside, a waterproof journal, sealed envelopes, and an old film reel. No USBs, no drives, just analog truth. Back at the Grace Project, Jenny had the reel converted. What played was a montage of footage, grainy, but clear enough. Vincent Rourke at a private gala, shaking hands with government officials, cash being loaded into unmarked vans. A secretly recorded meeting, audio faint but intelligible, discussing the transfer, window before demolition. And then near the end, something new. A document, signed, notarized, dated 6 months before the charity building collapse. It detailed a plan to repurposed the land quickly following an expected structural incident. Expected, not accidental. Expected. Jenny stared at the screen. This wasn't just conspiracy or suspicion. This was premeditation. This was murder. They brought the evidence straight to federal prosecutors. A new grand jury was convened. Subpoenas widened, and the story returned, louder than before. The Hart legacy. How a quiet man's files may rewrite corporate history. The name Samuel Hart became legend. And still, no one could find him. But Jenny knew he was watching. Because one morning, a package arrived at the foundation. Inside, a seashell, a photograph, and a slip of paper that simply read, "It was never about destroying them. It was about proving she didn't die for nothing." The photo showed a new bench, cliffside, looking out over the Pacific. No names, just the same bronze plaque. "Some truths whisper. Thank you for listening." Jenny printed the message and framed it, hung it in the entry of the Grace Project, next to a blown-up image of Samuel's letter. Every investigator who walked in saw it, and they understood something unspoken. You didn't need a badge to fight corruption. You didn't need fame to change the world. You just had to listen when truth whispered, and not look away. It didn't happen overnight. The courts took time. The bureaucracy crawled. But once the final file from the forest cabin was authenticated, everything changed. The word intentional was the turning point. It turned whispers into headlines. Suspicion into trials, and Samuel Hart into something else entirely. A ghost, yes, but also a symbol. Journalists began calling him the Last Watchman. Podcasters debated whether he was a patriot or a vigilante. People printed his quotes on T-shirts, made short films about him. A stage play opened in Chicago titled Grave Letters, but no one ever found him. He didn't need to be found, because his silence was louder than their noise, and then the trial began. The State versus Vincent Rourke. Charges: racketeering, conspiracy to commit fraud, involuntary manslaughter. But the crown jewel was the documented knowledge that he knew the charity building would collapse, that the explosion had been calculated, disguised as tragedy, and executed with financial benefit in mind. And most damning of all, that he had been warned by one of his own investigators, Samuel Hart. Bledsoe testified, so did Dana Reyes, and then Jenny was called. She stood before a packed courtroom, lights, cameras, a dozen reporters scribbling every blink. She brought the letter, the first one, the one she had read on the bench, the one that had started it all. She held it up and said, "This wasn't written for a jury. It was written for her." She didn't cry until she said her final line. He never wanted justice for himself. He wanted memory for someone who never got a eulogy. The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge blinked slowly, as if awakening from some fog. The defense tried to paint Hart as mentally unstable, grieving, paranoid. But truth had inertia, and Samuel's meticulous records, with timestamps, dates, witnesses, were unstoppable. In the end, Rourke was convicted, sentenced to 35 years without parole. The room didn't erupt in cheers. There was only breath. One long, shared breath. Like everyone had been holding it since the letter first surfaced. The next day, Jenny returned to the bench at the cemetery. She brought nothing, said nothing. She simply sat, and in her silence she heard him, not literally, but in memory. The scratch of a pen, the sigh of grief, the ache of silence that asked nothing but to be shared. That evening, she received a package. No stamp, no sender. Inside, an aged envelope, her name, written in black ink, and one photograph. It showed the bench by the cliff, bathed in golden light. A man sat there, facing away, broad shoulders, hat tilted down, a notebook on his lap. The photo was signed, "This is my last letter. S.H." She opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside, "You were never supposed to carry this alone. I expected to die with the weight. But you lifted it. And in doing so, you gave her a voice louder than I ever could. They say some graves go unmarked, not from neglect but from love too large to fit in granite. That was her. I gave her a stone. You gave her a story. Thank you for finishing the pages I was too broken to write." There was a second sheet. No handwriting, just one printed phrase. "Let no truth go unheard." Jenny framed the letter. Not for the press, not for the Grace Project, for herself. Because some stories don't belong to the world, some stories belong to the souls brave enough to witness them. Later that year, a plaque was added to the original bench. Visitors left coffee cups beneath it, real and ceramic. Notes, folded pages, small stones. It became a pilgrimage, not to mourn him, but to thank him, and to whisper their own truths. One morning, a child visiting with her father asked, "Was he a superhero?" The father smiled. "No," he said. "He was better." The Grace Project began training volunteers under a new wing, the Heartline program, specialized training in cold case journalism and ethical storytelling. Jenny gave the keynote on its opening day. She didn't quote Samuel. She didn't dramatize the story. She just said, "Listen to the person no one sees. They're usually the one carrying everything." She still wrote him letters, every few months, left them at the cliffside bench, never signed them, never mailed them, but every time she returned, the old ones were gone. Some said he died years ago. Others believed he simply stopped being seen. Jenny never confirmed either way, because the truth wasn't in the ending, it was in the echo. 10 years after Samuel Hart left his first letter at the grave, a teenage boy sat on the very same bench. His name was Caleb Reyes. He was 15, angry, curious, brilliant, and tired of everyone telling him what he couldn't do. He'd never met Samuel, never read the original letters, but his mother, Dana, had told him everything, not as legend, but as memory. "Some men whisper so loudly the world finally stops to listen," she once told him. "And some women are the reason they still have something to say." Caleb didn't fully understand it then, but sitting on that bench now, holding a folded note he hadn't written, he started to. The cemetery was quiet. A soft drizzle clung to the trees like breath. Caleb unfolded the letter again. It wasn't addressed to anyone. It just said, "If you find this, don't look for me. I've already been found. But if you're the kind of person who reads, not just sees, then pick up where we left off. Truth is a story that never ends. Yours now, S.H." Caleb stared at the signature. It wasn't myth anymore. It was instruction. He went home, opened his laptop, and searched everything. Samuel Hart, Eleanor's Grace, The Grace Project, The Hart Files, Jenny Collins, Vincent Rourke, the charity building collapse, the trial, the cliffside bench, the bookstore shell note, the film reel. He built a wall of articles on his bedroom corkboard, red string included. Not because he didn't believe it, but because he did. Because something in him ached to be a part of something that mattered, something that whispered instead of screamed. That summer, Caleb interned at the Grace Project. Not through nepotism, he applied under an alias. Got in on merit. Jenny figured it out within 3 weeks. But she didn't say anything. She just gave him the job. He sorted old files, restored corrupted audio, cleaned metadata, annotated records from the Heartline archive. And one day, while scanning an old box marked unprocessed, he found it. A tape. No label. Just a strip of white tape across the front. "If you're listening, you're ready." He played it. Samuel's voice filled the room. "I never thought this would work. Not really. You try to convince yourself that grief is enough, that silence is noble, but silence only echoes when someone's willing to listen. So if you're hearing this, thank you. There's one more thing." A pause. Long. Careful. "There's a second ledger, not financial. Personal. Names of those who warned me, helped me, hid me. I kept them secret to protect them. But one day, the silence might swallow their stories too. So if the world is still forgetting, tell it again. Click, tape ended. Caleb brought it to Jenny. She listened to it once, then handed him the key to a storage locker in the basement. No press, she said. No tweets, no posts. Inside the locker, a second notebook, a metal tin with microfilm, and a sealed envelope addressed to the one who came next. Inside, "This is not a monument. This is a lantern. Carry it through the dark." Caleb cried for the first time in years, not because he was sad, because he finally understood. The story was not one man's. It was a legacy of listeners. 2 years later, he published his first investigative story. It didn't mention Samuel by name, but the subheadline read, "Some Truths Whisper." "I'm listening," and below it, a small symbol, a folded letter, drawn in white on black. The Grace Project now had a youth wing, not an app, not a trend, an actual movement, kids who studied whistleblower history, who learned to file FOIAs, who asked deeper questions at school board meetings. One girl, age 12, exposed a shady land deal in her town. A boy in Iowa uncovered misuse of federal funds in his school district. None of them wore capes. They just read, listened, remembered. The world was still broken. There were still lies, still corruption, still silence. But now there were lanterns, thousands of them. Jenny, older now, still visited the bench, sometimes with Dana, sometimes alone. One winter morning, she found a note tucked under the bronze plaque. She unfolded it. "You taught us how to hear the wind. We'll never let it go quiet again." No name, no signature, just a pressed white lily folded inside. Later that year, she received a package. Same script, same ink. Inside, a shell, a photo of Eleanor, a new notebook. Blank, and one final message. Truth doesn't end, so keep writing. Years had passed. The world had changed again. Caleb Reyes stood alone at the edge of the Pacific, where the cliffs fell into the sea like broken thoughts. Behind him, the bench still stood, worn but strong, anchored in stone. He held the last notebook in his hands. Not the one Samuel had written, the one he had filled. It was bound in salt-stained leather, pages curled from use. Inside, stories of whistleblowers and journalists, of single mothers who faced down city councils, of war veterans who exposed private prisons, of children who demanded cleaner water and safer schools. Each story carried the heartbeat of Samuel Hart's letter. Each one was proof that silence could be rewritten. Caleb knelt beside the bench and placed the notebook inside a waterproof case. Just beneath the foundation stone, there was no plaque for this, no cameras, just the wind and the sea. Back at the Grace Project headquarters, Jenny opened her inbox, an email from an unfamiliar address. Subject line, "There's something you should see." Attached, a scan of a handwritten note. It had been found inside a hollow book in a public library in Ohio. A janitor discovered it while cleaning. The message, "Truth never asks to be buried. It simply waits to be uncovered. If you're reading this, you're part of it now." Underneath, a symbol, a folded letter. The Heartline archive was now global, translated into 19 languages, cited in textbooks, protected under international transparency law. Jenny received invitations to speak on every continent. She declined them all, except one. A small town in Norway was opening a quiet museum dedicated to ordinary acts of courage. They wanted to feature the bench, not the real one, just a replica, and they wanted to inscribe a quote. Jenny offered one without hesitation. "He sat alone until someone listened. Then the whole world heard." The exhibit included artifacts, a folded letter, a seashell, a coffee cup, a typewritten transcript of Samuel Hart's first letter, a a soundproof booth where visitors could listen to the original audio recording. When people emerged, many were crying, some were silent, all were changed, and yet some still doubted he ever existed. There were no confirmed photos after the trial, no interviews, no voice on record except the letter. Some said he was a composite, a fable built from grief and longing, but those who knew better didn't argue. They just nodded, because the truth wasn't in proving Samuel Hart existed, it was in continuing the work he left behind. One foggy morning, a letter arrived at the Grace Project, mailed from a small coastal town. No return address. Inside, a simple message. "I'm still listening, and so is she." Underneath, pressed gently into the paper, a thumbprint. It wasn't proof, but it was something deeper. Presence. On the 10th anniversary of the first letter, the Grace Project released a book, Whispers That Changed the World. It told the story of Samuel and Eleanor Hart, of the bench, of the silence, of the woman who left coffee, of the journalist who followed the threads, of the teenager who carried the flame, and of a world that had, at long last, begun to pay attention. The dedication page. Read, for those who sit alone and for those who choose to sit beside them. Keep listening. Caleb Reyes returned to the grave one last time. He was older now. He had seen war, injustice, hope, renewal. He stood in front of the headstone, silent, and then he knelt. He didn't cry. He just whispered, "Thank you for not giving up." Then he reached into his coat pocket and placed a final letter beneath the stone. Inside, "The truth never died. We kept it breathing." As he walked away, the camera would have pulled back, if this were a movie, rising above the trees. The bench, the graves, the cliffs, the sea, the wind catching one corner of the letter, the folded edge trembling like breath, and maybe, just maybe, in the distance, the silhouette of a man on a boat, watching, just for a moment, then gone.